What if there was a safe space for you to explore artificial intelligence? What if there was a team of friendly professionals waiting to help you examine what you can do with AI in your courses? Welcome to the world of what if.
I'm so excited to be here today. It's December, it's 10 o'clock, it's Friday, so thank you for your time. And I'm excited for us to have a good conversation about Schlossberg's transition theory and kind of a coupling with an AI tool, which we'll be talking about Copilot today. So just as a bit of an overview for our time today, and I use the word conversation intentionally because although I'm the one presenting, I'm so excited to hear in any of your thoughts that you'd like to share in the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them there, and there'll also be some opportunities for you to share some of your insights as well. So I'll be talking a little bit about what support looks like during transition. So I'll share some information about how I've helped support students through transition, as well as how I've been helped through transition as well. Then we'll have a little fun and talk about how it is that you experience change. So when things are shifting and changing, what does that look like and feel like for you? Third, we're going to put on our scholarly hats and talk a little bit about transition theory. And then fourth, we'll talk more about what it could look like to couple that AI, couple theory with responsible use of an AI tool. And then last but not least, we'll have some final thoughts and have some opportunities for some questions. So hello again. My name is Linnsey McFerguson, and it's always so interesting for this part of the presentation, for the introduction. What do you say? How do you introduce the subject matter? So I thought about saying that I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a charcuterie board connoisseur. But as I was thinking about my particular professional trajectory, I thought that this phrase perfectly summed up what it is that I do for others. So I support people as they move through changes and transitions. That's kind of been the through line of what I've done. And I'm going to share just a little bit of information about that now. So in my current role as an online student success coach, I'm able to support students who are taking courses online, get connected to the resources, people, and places that can help them thrive, not only at their time during Florida Atlantic, but far beyond when they leave. And in a previous role, I was able to be an academic advisor and coach, supporting students on what the school calls academic probation, what I like to call academic recovery, and really helping those students reconnect to their why, reconnect to their academic goals, and truly get them to what that end goal is for them at Florida Atlantic anyway, which is graduation. I've also had the pleasure of being a career readiness trainer, so helping individuals think about where they are in their current careers, or if they're currently unemployed, to imagine what that could look like for them, and think about the skills that they need, and also think about the strengths that they already have, and perhaps some things that they need to work on as well. And then last but not least, I've had an opportunity to help people through both social and spatial transitions during my time in housing and residential education. So for anyone who has ever worked in that particular area, hats off to you. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, but I was able to serve as a resident assistant. So literally helping people transition into and out of residence halls, and then as an assistant director, helping build a residential curriculum so that students could not only have those social experiences, but also be able to live, learn where they live. And as I think about those different kind of parts of my career, in each of those iterations, I think about what it looked like to receive support and help, whether that was from colleagues, friends, family, whether those were for good changes, maybe some not so good changes, things that might have been unexpected. And I discovered that support really does make all the difference during those times. And hopefully you can agree with me in saying that everyone is managing some form of change or transition. So it could be big, it could be small. Normally this could be something like you're at your local coffee shop and you normally get an iced matcha lavender latte, and the coffee shop is now no longer using that lavender syrup, right? So seemingly small example, seemingly small change, but still a change nonetheless. So now this is where I need your participation. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about a change or transition that you're currently managing. So that can be personal, that can be professional, technological, or something else. Remember, it can be big, it can be small. So please take some time to share that in the chat. Anything in our chat?
Shannon said, I have been living in South Florida for over 8 years and I still feel like I'm in transition.
That is very true. Thank you, Shannon, for that example. Especially when we consider things like, I-95 and the unpredictability of what it looks like to drive on I-95. I feel brand new all the time as well.
Dr. Gibbs also says, I am a new faculty at FAU.
Okay, big transition. Welcome to Florida Atlantic. We're so happy to have you here.
And Miguel says he's transitioning out of grad school.
Whew. Congratulations, Miguel. The relief that you must feel, and we're so excited for you and so proud of you for that accomplishment as well. So for my personal example, I wanted to share about a change that I managed in childhood. So this is an image of little me, or what Google Gemini thought was a version of little me. And as I think about that time in managing transition, the example that comes to mind for me is Fridays, right? So a Friday such as today, Fridays typically meant two things. So Fridays meant pizza, as you can see there on the screen. And Fridays also meant renting tapes, right? Tapes, VHS tapes, that rectangular plastic thing that's in my hand. So for some context, a VHS tape, that's what that is before we shifted to moving to DVDs, and I'll talk a little bit about that. You put said VHS tape in a video cassette recorder, also known as a VCR, and that is a TV antenna. So just for some context to make sure we're all on the same page. So on Fridays, my family would go to a local video rental shop, right? So imagine it, if you're not familiar, it's like a library for tapes, right? You have this card, you present this card, it's, like a membership system, and you can rent whatever videos you want. And I just remember that being such an exciting time for me. And the kind of shift and change happened when I was having a conversation with a friend, and he told me that his family was going to be getting a DVD player. I said, what is that? He said, we're going to be able to get rid of our VHS tapes. So you're not going to have to rewind anymore. You're not going to have to fix the tape when it comes out. You're going to be able to skip to different chapters in a movie that you're watching. I could not fathom what my friend was talking about. It didn't make sense to me. And I couldn't imagine getting rid of my beloved copy of The Little Mermaid that just the dots weren't connecting for me. And so as we all know now, we know how that story played out, right? So we did eventually shift to DVDs. Also, the DVD rentals that were outside of many stores. And now, of course, we're all familiar with streaming, although I do still have some DVDs in my collection. So now another kind of question for the group. So I gave a personal example. I'd love to hear more from you. What does it look like for you when you experience change? So what option best describes you? So I'm going to give an example of 3 different kinds of people, right? There's so many more, but just in my personal experience, these are kind of the 3 categories of change that I've seen that people fall into. And remember, this is a safe space. Share in the chat which one you feel like applies to you. So we've got group A, right? Very straight line. Change, I'm not a fan. Unsubscribe, 10 of 10, would not recommend. It's not for me, right? So if that's you, put an A in the chat. Judge-free zone, right? B, these individuals are okay with change as long as it's just a little bump in the road, right? So you've got your plan, things change and dip just a little bit, but you're able to pivot back to your original plan as quickly as possible. Some people fall into that category. And then last but not least, we have people in category C. So these individuals are okay with change as long as it is predictable. So predictable change, that seems like a bit of an oxymoron, that doesn't make sense. But I'll go back to an example from academic advising where there are certain times in the academic calendar when advisors know that meetings are going to pick up, there's going to be a lot more volume, and that's predictable. You can look on the academic calendar and know during registration, when students are able to drop and add classes to their schedule, things are going to pick up. And so that's the example for that one, predictable change. But here's the reality, right? As uncomfortable as it may appear and feel, especially for those of us who are planners, this can feel like chaos. And so for some of you, this may be what your career trajectory has looked like. right? You may have been able to experience a lot of different careers, do a lot of different things in a lot of different places. For some of you, this may be what your kind of path to graduation looked like. So maybe you started off as an art major and then you shifted to a biology major, then you shifted to a sociology major, then you shifted back to an art major. All kinds of paths, but eventually you get to your goal. If we're honest with ourselves, this is what AI, artificial intelligence, can feel like, right? Things are shifting, changing. There's so much that you can do with AI. What is an inappropriate use of AI? What does that look like in our personal lives? What does it look like in higher education or even in a classroom? How do you describe what AI use can look like, within a course for faculty members? There's a lot that's happening. Even the endorsed AI tools that I mentioned a little bit earlier, those tools have shifted and changed. Now that we're in December, that list looks different now than it did in January. But what if we were able to have a conversation about a theory that's connected to change and then couple that with the responsible use of AI? So that part in the middle, that is where today's kind of presentation and conversation will be happening. And I realized that I didn't mention AI, FAU's endorsed tool. So if you'd like to scan that QR code, you can see the entire list, the list that I mentioned that has grown so much. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Linnsey K. Schlossberg. So Dr. Schlossberg is a counselor, researcher, and professor. Dr. Schlossberg is also 95 years young. Last I checked, she lives in Florida, actually in Sarasota. So we're in the same state, which is awesome. And Dr. Schlossberg is known for her work on adult development and transitions. More recently, her work has focused on what it looks like for those who are older to deal with the transitions of aging. In my research, I actually found that she was over a group at a local community center called the Aging Rebels, which I thought was a cool name. And they have basically group meetings to discuss what it looks like to age, deal with loss, rediscover yourself, right? So all of these transitions. So she's still being able to do that work even now. I mentioned the transition theory that we'll talk about today. I was actually introduced to that during my master's program in higher education, but as you'll see from Dr. Schlossberg's current work and then what I'll discuss today, the applications of this theory are far beyond kind of its original intent. So for the purposes of time for today, I won't be able to go through the entire theory from Dr. Schlossberg, right? We don't necessarily have an entire semester together, but for the purpose of today, I'll be focusing on Dr. Schlossberg's 4 S's. So those S's are situation, self, support, and strategies. So situation, just at the baseline, what is it that is shifting and changing around you? What's happening? How sudden, expected, positive, negative, or ambiguous is it? And then as an overarching thought in that, thinking about what is the context for this actual change? Is it at work? Is it at home in your personal life? What does that look like? The next section talks about self. So kind of being more introspective during this section, asking yourself, who am I as I face this transition? So considering your personal identities, strengths, and even past coping patterns. So thinking about those things that perhaps maybe didn't work well for you as coping patterns, but also giving yourself credit for those coping patterns that you may have developed that have worked well for you. And support, so important, as I mentioned a little bit before. So what people and resources are available to me? So is that a colleague? Is that a friend, a family member? Depending on the shift and change and transition, is that a therapist? Trying to identify that web of support that's available to you as you go through this change. And then last but not least, right? So for the people who are like, I need something more stringent, I need a checklist. These are like the actual strategies that you'll utilize. So taking into consideration, how can you respond, reframe, or regulate yourself as you're going through this particular change or transition. So consider this. So consider the 4 S's. And I'd like you to go back to that previous example that I mentioned a little bit earlier for you to think about a change or transition that you're currently managing, and think about it from the perspective of the 4 S's. So, for the example that you were thinking about, do you have support? Do you have a support network to help you through that change? Is that something that you wish you had? Just take some time to kind of put it into the context of the 4 S's. And I'll be giving some examples for students staff and faculty now. All right, so we're going to begin with our students in transition. So for those who are not familiar, this is Mike Wazowski, right? And Mike Wazowski is a brand new first-year student at Monsters University. So for those who are familiar with the film, you know Mike had a pretty bumpy start as he began his higher education journey. So really trying to make those connections, figure out where he fit, figure out if the career path that he had planned for himself was, actually something he wanted to do, being a scare and a professional monster. And so just a little bit more about Mike. Mike struggles with making social connections and doesn't know how to ask for help. He wants to do everything alone. So perhaps you've worked with a student like Mike before, or perhaps you have been Mike, or perhaps you are Mike. That's just important to identify about yourself. We're going to use Copilot coupled with Schlossberg's transition theory and see how we can support Mike as he's going through a particular transition. So I'm going to do a little screen share now so you can see that, and I will read the prompt for us. So remember, when utilizing AI, you can be as vague or as in-depth as you want. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like moving forward. So hello, Copilot. I am an online student success coach who is supporting a student at Monsters University. Unfortunately, the student failed a recent test and is at risk of being removed from the SCARE program at his institution. Nobody wants that. I'd like to provide assistance to him based on Schlossberg's transition theory, specifically the 4 S's: situation, self, support, and strategies. I've encouraged the student to visit his professor during their upcoming office hours. Mike wants to discuss how he can improve his performance in his Scaring 101 course. I'd like you to create a list of 8 questions that Mike can utilize during his meeting with his professor. Create 2 questions for each of the 4 S's as a starting point, right? So very in-depth. If I were supporting Mike, you want this student to be as prepared as possible for the meeting with their professor, because we want to make the best use of not only the student's time, but the professor's time as well. And that will, that goes over well for a student who is prepared for office hours. I'm sure if we have some faculty in attendance, I'm sure you could appreciate a student being prepared when they're coming to have a conversation with you. So let's see what Copilot kind of came up with us. And again, as just a starting point. So you can see some information about situation, self. So as I prompted it to, it's broken down the questions into the four different sections. So for the support section, you can see that Mike is taking this time to ask, right? So to build that connection with the professor, to ask about campus resources that can help him in his course. So what are there campus resources such as tutoring or study groups that you recommend for students struggling in Scaring 101? What are some things that I can do to get some additional support? And then Mike also asks, would you be open to reviewing my practice scares or giving me feedback outside of class? So that could be via email, that could be another meeting that you set up with, but really utilizing the AI tool to give Mike the confidence to be able to have a meeting with the professor. Because it can be scary sometimes. I talk to students that say they're so scared to talk to their professors, and they shouldn't be, because you're able to build some really good relationships. And in the last section, the strategy section, this one was particularly interesting for me. And as you can see, for question number 8, if you were in my position, what would you focus on first to turn things around? So really taking that responsibility for, okay, I didn't perform as well as I would have liked, but what does it look like to kind of move forward? And the fact that they're able to have that conversation with a faculty member, I think is excellent. So now we'll move on to the next example. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, academic advisors and what it looks like for staff to have transitions. And academic advisors, there's a lot that goes into that role. It's more than just kind of classes oftentimes. So academic advisors guide students through crisis, confusion, and transition on a regular basis. So as I mentioned before, it's not just, okay, these are the classes you need to take. It could be, a situation where a student is wanting to change their major and shift the major. I remember several years ago at a different institution, I had a conversation with a student that wanted to shift their major, but they were afraid because their parent would no longer finance said major. They wanted them to be in this particular major. Tough conversation, right? One, not solely for an academic advisor to have, right? Providing some insight, but that's a conversation that the student had with their family member. Also, when we talk about classes, thinking about a student who maybe hasn't performed as well as they would have liked in a class, talking about dropping a class, that can be a big conversation that can have ripple effects as well for their financial aid and other things like that and their completion for their degree. And so I've often asked myself, who helps the helpers, right? Individuals who help people on a regular basis. You're always providing, support. What does it look like for you to receive support? And especially at high volume times of the year. So this example can show us how AI can be a tool to help advisors actively implement self-care practices, again, especially during those high volume times of the year. So we'll go to our next prompt and talk a little bit about it. So I'll read our prompt. Hello, Copilot. I am an academic coach and advisor who supports first-year students at my university. Registration is quickly approaching, and I want to prepare myself for this high-volume time in the semester. Help me create a daily schedule for peak advising weeks that includes specific reminders to drink water, which is so important, stretch, and take my lunch break. Keep the schedule realistic during high-volume days. And for the sake of this presentation, I recently learned about Schlossberg's transition theory, specifically the 4 S's: situation, self, support, and strategies, and I'd like to implement them into my plan. So as you can see, these are the kind of categories of focus, right? And you're able to shift and adjust this based on your personal needs. So self-care reminders are what we're going to focus on, time blocks for advising sessions, buffer times for emails and urgent issues, and then integrating Schlossberg's 4 S's. So based on the prompt, the output from the AI was a simple daily or sample daily schedule for peak advising weeks, right? So you can see, assuming an 8:30 to 5:00 p.m. workday. Again, the beautiful thing about artificial intelligence is that as you're prompting, you can actually say, my day starts at 7:30 and I'm done at a certain time. Create a schedule based on your personal needs. You could also even go as far as to say, I take lunch at 12:30, and you're able to get more of a specific output. Now, as you can see, just at the beginning, which is so helpful, there's a moment for you to stop, pause, also kind of do a quick check-in, as you can see there, before you jump into those meetings. So as I mentioned before, for those who commute to work, I-95, there may have been a circus on I-95 this morning. So to be able to have that time to stop, breathe, actually look at your schedule, and to take time for yourself, you're able to be the best version of yourself for the students that you'll be meeting with a little bit later today. All right, and it goes on to talk about an advising block, again, able to be adjusted depending on how many students you see per day. Taking some time for email and documentation. Again, you can see that reminder to drink water. And then I really appreciate this example, the lunch break, non-negotiable, right? Sometimes we're moving so fast that you'll look up, I know I have before, and you're like, how is it 2:30 already? Have I eaten today? So building that into a plan could be helpful. You can see that Copilot suggested stepping away from your desk, which is excellent, right? But that may not be a reality for you. So maybe if you kind of go back a little bit and reverse engineer this example, maybe it means actually taking your lunch break, actually taking time to eat and nourish yourself. Then perhaps the next portion could be, okay, 2 times a week or 3 times a week, I want to take lunch outside of my office. So again, adjustable based on what your needs are. And then it gives some additional suggestions for what it looks like throughout the day. You'll continue your appointments, a stretch reminder, which is helpful. If allowable, if your schedule will kind of fit some buffer time there to kind of handle any urgent things that may have happened. And then I can really appreciate this last part. So wrapping up the day, having a reflection and reset moment. So asking yourself, okay, I've met with all of these students. The day has been hectic. What actually worked today? What questions did I ask a student that actually prompted some good conversations, or what needs to be adjusted? And then, acknowledge that you're doing the best that you can. It's a high volume time of the week, or high volume time in the academic semester, and all you can do is your best. All right, and last but not least, for our final example, we'll talk a little bit about faculty managing transition. So faculty, for those who are online, we don't have the time to talk about how many obligations you have, right? Outside of teaching, service, you're publishing, you're doing research, you're doing studies. There's so much that goes into being a faculty member. And so I thought it would be fitting for this particular example to discuss what it would look like to create a sustainable research and writing schedule. So I'm going to show you the output from the AI tool in just a moment, but also the example that I used for the academic advisors a little bit earlier could easily be applied to your role as well. So let's take a look at the example, and we'll focus on the situation and strategies, but I'm going to show you kind of the extensive output that Copilot provided, again, as a starting point, to kind of get you moving in the right direction of actually working towards your goals. So I will take some time to read the prompt. So I am a faculty member adjusting to increased research and publishing expectations as our institution recently earned the Carnegie R1 classification. Congratulations, Florida Atlantic, yay. Help me create a sustainable writing and research schedule for the academic year that balances teaching, service, and scholarship. Include weekly writing goals, protected writing time, accountability strategies, and ways to maintain momentum during peak teaching periods. And again, for the sake of this example, I recently read an article about Schlossberg's transition theory, specifically the 4 S's: situation, self, support, and strategies. And I'd like to implement them into my plan. So Copilot starts off with a bit of congratulations for the shift to R1, and it begins kind of breaking down the things that we've prompted it to in different sections. So you see this assumptions that the tool has made. You're able to customize as needed. So maybe you don't teach during the summer. Maybe you're able, in this specific prompt, you're able to say, okay, I teach 3 classes, I teach 4 classes. Even going as far as talking about the modality of classes that you teach. Are these classes in person? Are these classes, asynchronous, synchronous online? What does that look like for you to get more of the output that you're looking for, right? So using artificial intelligence as a kind of foundational tool to help you get your plan going. And you can see it goes semester by semester. So what could that look like? I mentioned reverse engineering before. So, you have these goals of you want to publish, you want to do speaking, but what does it look like to actually break that down? And I appreciate that as specific as you want to be, the tool is able to be specific as well. This section, I definitely think the tool for sure took some liberties with having a 7:30 start for writing on a Monday, right? That could be a bit much, or maybe you're a morning person. Maybe that's the perfect time that your mind is really firing. But again, you're able to adjust it based on your needs. But you can see that there's actually a schedule broken down for each day, what that looks like, so that you're not feeling overwhelmed as you're going through the writing process, as you're going through the research process. And again, a friendly reminder here for a protected time rule. So treat these blocks like classes. Busy, do not schedule. So, without appropriate notice, you wouldn't necessarily just schedule something over a class. You want to take that same kind of intention that you would take with your students and utilize that on yourselves. Then you can see some weekly writing goals, so broken down into the SMART goals, which I think are excellent, right? Because you're able to kind of track your progress and see if you're on track for completing your plan. And then accountability. I really enjoy this particular section as well, because you can see for the first 2 examples, it involves community. So having a scholarship pod, so a weekly 30-minute check-in with other scholars, whether that's in person or virtually, just to make sure that you have that support. And then co-writing sessions as well. So again, in person, virtual, whatever it looks like to connect to your scholarly community to still make sure that you're getting work done. I don't know how many of you have had the same example as me of going to a coffee shop, and there's just something so invigorating, not just the caffeine, right? But you're in a space where you can see, oh, that person's working on something. Oh, I wonder what they're working on. And it kind of gives you that extra boost. So we're able to kind of adjust that for the same work that you're doing here. Right. And now for the maintaining momentum during peak teaching weeks. So maybe doing some micro writing. Maybe your writing time doesn't look as lengthy during those high volume times, but you're still taking time to build that momentum. You can see a project and task pipeline, again, able to be adjusted based on what it is, what that end goal is. So you could even say, the submission date for this particular paper is March 15th, 2026. And the AI is able to kind of reverse engineer and create a plan for you up to that point, right? So instead of taking the time to, calculate how many days is that, you're able to actually get to the work that actually fuels you and excites you, and eventually putting things out into the world for your publishing and research. But one of the first things that the tool kind of did as an output for Schlossberg's 4 S's, I appreciate the reality audit, right? So identifying all of those fixed commitments, so classes, office hours, committee meetings, all of those meetings that when they are, putting those into a calendar, and then building out other things around them so that, you don't run into a situation where you are kind of adding things over those important obligations, and then add those writing blocks next, right? Because that's what we're wanting to prioritize, add those. And it's going to mention a little bit more about those writing pods, the co-writing groups. And then I did want to mention this section. So the next to the last bullet point in the strategy section, you can see evaluation. So it doesn't have to be Friday. That's just what the output was for this. But having some time to kind of review and have a monthly retrospective for your progress, or perhaps even areas that need to be improved. So it suggests on the first Friday of each month, think about your outputs, the pipeline health, bottlenecks. Are there things that are kind of stalling the progress for the project that you're working on? Sometimes these things are outside of your control, right? Are some of your co-authors not moving as quickly as they need to on this particular project? Identifying what that is so that you can pivot into progress. All right, and then last but not least, the 6th point, celebrate and notate small wins to reinforce momentum. So similarly to the academic advisor example, sometimes you are moving so fast as faculty, right? There's so many different obligations that you have that you forget to celebrate things, to celebrate, wow, this was one of my best semesters yet because of this specific example that I utilized in a class, or I got some really good feedback from students in my spot evaluations. How can I implement what they have shared perhaps into future courses? So taking that time to celebrate things, not only small things, but also big things as well, because it is important. All right. And so as we kind of get to the end of our presentation today, I'd like you to take this thought. The 4 S's remind us that change is complex, but manageable, right? Change, sometimes it's in our control, sometimes it's out of our control. It can be a lot, but you're able to manage it. And then with the thoughtful use of AI tools can help us support ourselves and one another during transition. So really thinking about the transitions that we're going through, strategically utilizing AI tools to create a plan for ourselves, whether that's a writing schedule or a self-care plan, to really make sure that we are the best versions of ourselves. Here are a couple of references to share. So thank you so much for joining me today.